Hi, my name is Mike. Welcome to Standing on Truth in Minnesota. Here today we're going to talk with Ron Schultz. He is running for Attorney General, state of Minnesota. Good afternoon, Ron. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little history background?
Sure. So I'm a lifelong Minnesotan, with the exception of a brief time that I spent in college and in the military. I grew up on a dairy farm in the southwestern part of the state, outside of a small town called Adrian. It was a typical small town upbringing. Again, worked on a dairy farm. I wouldn't have traded that for anything in life because it really gave me an understanding of what it meant to have to show up for work every day. When you have a dairy farm, cows need to be milked twice a day, 7 days a week, all year round. So it was a great upbringing. I was an athlete in high school, small town high school, probably an average athlete, but the most important thing that happened to me during high school is that I met the woman who is now my wife, Janet. And during high school, we started dating as sophomores, and we've actually had a date every Saturday night since that. So that's been probably the most important and significant thing in my life. She's really been my partner in everything we've done. When I graduated from high school, I went to college at Marquette University in Milwaukee on an Army ROTC scholarship. I got a degree in mechanical engineering. After I graduated from college, I had a conversation with the Army because I owed the Army 4 years in return for their paying for college. And I said, I'd like to go to law school and then go in and complete my 4-year obligation in the Army. And they were fine with that. So I went to law school at the University of Minnesota here. And after graduation, I went into the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. And so that's the legal branch of the military. And I spent 4 years doing criminal trial work, first as a defense lawyer, very similar to a public defender job, and then I was a prosecutor. So I've handled countless serious felony cases, a lot of drug cases, assault cases, rape cases, child molestation cases. I've had a murder case. So I had a broad range of felony level trial experience when I was in the military. When I got out of the military, I was stationed at a base in California. When I got out of the military, Janet and I, and at that time, we had 2 of our 3 children, moved back to Minnesota, and I started working in private practice in downtown Minneapolis, which is, as I sit here and speak, still where I am at a large law firm in downtown Minneapolis. And I decided to run for Attorney General, so different chapter in my life right now.
Okay, so the job you're running for is Attorney General. Could you give us a little brief description of what that job consists of?
The Attorney General in Minnesota is one of the 5 constitutional, what are known as the constitutional officers in the state. You've got the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, and the state auditor. Okay. So those are the 5 constitutional officers. The Attorney General is the chief lawyer for the state of Minnesota. The Attorney General represents the state of Minnesota and the people of Minnesota in all of the legal actions that can impact the state. And there are approximately 200 lawyers in the Attorney General's office. And the Attorney General's office represents every board and every commission and every department in the state. And as you might expect with an organization as big as the state of Minnesota and all the different agencies that they have, they're going to have a lot of legal needs, everything from advice on contracts to employment law issues to litigation issues. The Attorney General's office also has a large consumer protection division, so if people in Minnesota think that they've been defrauded or injured in some consumer capacity or out there, they can report that to the Attorney General's office. Attorney General's office handles that. The Attorney General's office handles some criminal prosecutions under certain circumstances, but most of the criminal prosecutions in the state of Minnesota are handled by local county attorneys. But local county attorneys can ask the Attorney General to come in and help them on cases, and they do so when the cases are complex or they need more resources. And that happens frequently enough. The governor can also direct the Attorney General to take over a case that may be done by a county attorney.
Okay.
There's another area that's relevant to this election campaign that is also within the scope of the duties that the Attorney General has, and that is ferreting out and prosecuting fraud, right? Now, the Minnesota Attorney General's office has a small Medicare fraud prosecution branch there. But over the last few years, especially under Keith Ellison's watch, they've done a few cases, mostly against individual type defendants. They've not done any of the large systemic fraud cases like Feeding Our Future, that massive fraud case that was prosecuted by the feds. And in fact, I would argue that the evidence is pretty clear that Keith Ellison has basically turned a blind eye to the massive, and I'm talking massive fraud that we have in this state. You've seen various estimates from $1 billion to $9 billion. Joe Thompson, who was the acting U.S. attorney for about 6 months and then is the attorney that was primarily responsible for those federal prosecutions, said recently that the fraud in all the various state programs may add up to $9 billion. It's huge. And we are still just scratching the surface on that fraud. Keith Ellison has done almost nothing to combat that fraud. And in fact, I submit he has turned a blind eye to that. In December of 2021, for example, he met in his office with a handful of people who were there to complain about how they were being treated by other government agencies in their grant requests. They claimed they were being discriminated against and that those agencies should have been handing more money to them, and they were not. Keith Ellison lent a very sympathetic ear to that, said he would help them, claimed that what the agency was doing to them was piddly stuff, and said, you'd be surprised at how these agencies will come around if they get a letter from the Attorney General's office. Well, it turns out that at least 2 of those people in that meeting turned out months later to be indicted in the federal case on the Feeding Our Future fraud, all right? So he not only turned a blind eye to it, he had a meeting with people and offered to help them in their dealings with the state agencies to make sure they got handed even more money. That's how bad the problem is, okay? He has just turned a blind eye to that. When I become Attorney General, fighting fraud, recovering taxpayers' dollars, representing Minnesotans will be a primary responsibility, and the Attorney General's office has broad investigatory power to go after and ferret out fraud.
Sounds great. And that's, as we know, Keith Ellison is not doing for us today. So that's interesting. How are you qualified to do this job then? You gave some qualifications you have.
I gave some qualifications earlier. So let me just chat a little bit about my legal career. Again, started in the military.
Right.
So I've got a broad range of trial experience there. I've spent my post-military career in private law practice. And I actually led a 200-lawyer law firm. The law firm that I practiced at had 7 offices throughout the country.
Okay.
And from 2019 to 2024, I was the chairman of that law firm. So, I mean, I know what it's like to run a 200-lawyer organization because I've done it.
Okay.
I've also had the great opportunity and the good fortune to try and win a lot of large lawsuits, frequently representing the little guy in battles against larger, entrenched, well-funded corporate entities. And frequently those people I've represented have been small companies and inventors. As I mentioned earlier, I have a degree in mechanical engineering, and so I also do patent litigation, very complex litigation representing frequently inventors against usually larger entities that have used their inventions without permission. So I have sued and been adverse to the likes of General Electric, Sony Corporation, Canon Corporation, Microsoft. I mean, I could go on and on of all the large entities that I've gone against. So I know what it's like to represent the little guy. I know what it's like to represent, and would do that representing the people in Minnesota if there were people taking advantage of them. So I've got broad range of experience. I have been recognized by many different groups and organizations as one of the top lawyers in the country. In 2024 and 2025, for example, Forbes magazine has me on their list of the top 200 lawyers in America. Unlike the current Attorney General, who I submit is really a politician and not a real lawyer, I'm a real lawyer.
Great. That's great to hear. That's what we need in Minnesota. What are your plans for Minnesota? What are you going to do? You talked a little bit about going after fraud and whatnot. You're a little more in depth of what you run a program, your office of 200 some lawyers already. Minnesota has about the same amount for the attorney under the Attorney General, so you already have that.
Right.
So what are your major concerns for Minnesota?
Well, my concerns, I think, are basically the same, the concerns that the average Minnesotan has. The average Minnesotan is concerned about the rampant fraud we have in state government and how nobody's really been held accountable for that fraud. And they're concerned that their hard-earned taxpayer dollars are being handed out without supervision, oversight, or any effort to recover those funds if it turns out that those funds are being given to fraudsters. And as I mentioned before, the Attorney General's office has broad investigatory powers to pursue those fraudulent activities, and that's going to be one very important aspect of what I do. The other thing that will be a significant change when I'm elected is the attitude toward law enforcement. Keith Ellison is a charter member of the anti-police movement, all right? What people don't fully appreciate, and he tries to gloss over, is what he did in the fall of 2021. And let me explain in a little more detail what happened in the fall of 2021. It was post George Floyd. The City Council of Minneapolis proposed a charter amendment to the city charter. So Minneapolis is governed by the city charter. The city charter calls for, among other things, that the city have a police department, and that police department have a certain number of police officers per population of the city. And in fact, there was some litigation in the last 1 or 2 years against the city of Minneapolis for violating their charter by not having enough police officers, and the city lost that case. They were required to hire more police officers, and they in fact did. But back in 2021, the City Council of Minneapolis proposed some charter amendments, and one of those that was known as Question 2 on the ballot would have done the following. It would have abolished the Minneapolis Police Department, and it would have replaced the Minneapolis Police Department with what the charter amendment called a Department of Public Safety that could, this is language out of the statute, could have, if needed, licensed police officers. So it would have abolished the police department, and there would have been no guarantee that the city of Minneapolis would in fact have had licensed police officers, could have, under the amendment, and of course, along with that, it eliminated the requirement that there be so many police officers per population.
Wow.
Keith Ellison campaigned hard, and I mean hard. He was out on the campaign trail day after day after day, trying to convince the voters of Minneapolis to pass that charter amendment. Well, even the very liberal voters of Minneapolis refused to do so. The no votes for that were 56%. So when Keith Ellison tries to say he's not anti-cop, he never wanted to defund the police department, that is absolutely wrong. The record is very clear that he wanted to not only defund the police department in Minneapolis, he wanted to eliminate the police department in Minneapolis. That, of course, will change if I'm Attorney General. I will work with local law enforcement, the local law enforcement chiefs, and one of the things I'm going to say to them is, what can I do to help you recruit more police officers. Because right now, nobody wants to be a police officer. Who wants to be a police officer in this environment, all right? They feel, every one of them feels they've got a target on their back.
Correct.
Put there by the current Attorney General.
Correct.
That will change.
There is that no backing them up.
Right.
Like we're supposed to back up our forces. Okay. Is
So,
there anything else that you'd like to share that you'd like to bring on to Minnesota?
So there are other, my top 4 issues in the campaign, just to make sure we're clear on that, which you can find in some level of detail on my website, ronformnag, ronformnag.com, if your listeners want to go to the website. But they're fraud, crime, support for law enforcement, and fairness in girls' sports. Right now, this Attorney General thinks it's just fine. It's just fine if biological males play on girls' sports teams. It's not fine. It's not fine in my view, and it's not fine in the view of most Minnesotans. That's a 70-30, 80-20 issue. When I'm out on the campaign trail, I run into very few people who want biological males competing on girls' sports teams. And the position that this Attorney General has taken on that, his arguments that under Minnesota law that's required are wrong. And that's going to change when I become Attorney General.
Very good, very good. And you already mentioned your channel that you can go to.
Right, and that's ronformnag.com.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for joining us, and please stay tuned for more. And definitely go to Ron's channel and check him out, check his blog. And if you can help with contributions or help him campaigning, door knocking, and appreciate you guys listening. And thank you again for being here.
Thank you,
Ron.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You bet. All right.